Hello and welcome back to the Stacey West YouTube channel, and welcome to the second edition of our monthly show. The first monthly show last month, funnily enough, went down unbelievably well. So we're back at it again. And of course, I am joined by Mr. Tactical Genius himself, Chris Lamming. How are we doing, Chris?
Oh, genius is strong. Tactical nerd, maybe. I'll take nerd. Genius is a little bit excessive, I think. But I'm very well, thank you, mate. How are you?
Good. I am really well. It's kind of hard not to be well and happy when we're talking about Lincoln City at the minute, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a good time to be a Lincoln City supporter, isn't it?
It really is. Considering the sort of run that we've been on we're coming up, seven years really since that National League title winning season, 7 or 8 years. Maybe.
How can it possibly be that long ago?
I know, but it feels like we're just getting better and better each season, which is really positive. And speaking of that, speaking of things going unbelievably well, I guess we better talk about it in context. So why don't we kick off, as we do every month, with taking a look back at the last month's results. So, Chris, as we can see, the results are on the screen. It's not been a bad month, has it?
No, you know what? That Bolton game feels like a very long time ago, doesn't it?
Doesn't it just? The only time we conceded more than 2 this month was against Bolton. Only one of 2 games that we've even conceded this month. 5 clean sheets in there. For the record, I have put Sheffield United down as a win because we won on penalty. Yeah, all right, it was a draw in 90 minutes, but even that draw kind of felt like a win.
It was a win. We won.
It was.
We went through.
Well, it was. It was.
Yeah.
But just looking at this month and the amount of green, well, it's like we kind of said earlier, it makes us so happy to be Lincoln fans right now, doesn't it?
Yeah, we've had a really good start to the season, and I think something we mentioned this time on the last show when we was kind of previewing the start of the season, we said, particularly when we were speaking about the squad and about the transfer window. Just as a little side note, by the way, everybody, we're recording this on transfer deadline day. I completely forgot it was transfer deadline today, and that's just not for me. It's like my soap opera. I tune into it every year, and it just shows how relaxed I'm about it. Like we're fine. We might discuss later about what we might like to see if we need anything else. I know you mentioned it on the podcast with Gary, but yeah, it's transfer deadline day today, and I don't care. We're fine. We're absolutely fine. If we don't sign anybody, we are still fine. But I think what we mentioned last time about on the monthly show previewing the season was we've got a real good opportunity here of having a positive start to the season because we got a lot of our business done early, and a lot of clubs would still be kind of unfinished and certainly nowhere near as finished as we are. And has that had a part to play? It's difficult to know, but it's certainly nice that it could have played a part, and ultimately we're in a really, really good place now moving into September.
I would definitely say that it has had a part to play because when recording the previews of this season, that obviously many of you guys would have seen on the YouTube, so many opposition fans have made comments about the fact that, yeah, all right, we're still a few players away. We're not a finished team. Blackpool said that they needed something like 6 or 7 players in. And the fact that, yes, okay, we have made a couple of signings since that Bolton game, but nothing really that's changed the team that outlandishly.
Yeah, the signings that we've added have been adding to the squad primarily and adding depth and options rather than a player that we absolutely needed and we were really kind of dysfunctional without. So think about Blackpool on Saturday, and we made a comment about Connolly playing left wing back for them. They clearly needed a left wing back. Then if they're playing Colony left wing back, you're a left wing back short. They need to sign someone who can play left wing back. Whereas we didn't need to sign anybody there was no definite holes in our squad before the season kicked off. We just added to that squad as the month has progressed.
Which again has just made it so impressive. And I'm very much going to echo your kind of comment on deadline day. It does feel like a really empty deadline day today. We had, when we had our content planning meeting back at the start of July, one of the things we spoke about was doing like a deadline day live this evening, you know. And actually, I was talking to Gaz about it at the start of the week, and we said we don't need to do it because we may make a signing today. That is it. There's no rush to get things done today. There's no desperation, which is such a good place to be in. Now, Chris, looking down at these results, obviously, if we break them down into league and cup, we've got, you know, 3 league wins, 1 league draw, 1 league loss. I do believe when we were previewing, we all kind of said about 7 points is something we'd be happy with. We're coming out with 10.
Yeah.
Like you say, it is really positive. But is there one game out of them that maybe impressed you the most, or one of the games that really stands out compared to the rest?
Shrewsbury. You know what? No, there's 3 because Wickham was a big one. I mentioned this on the last show. Wickham. I'll expand on both my points here because I picked. You asked me to pick one. I picked 2.
No, go for it.
So Wickham, because on paper I think it was a club that was on a similar level to us. I did predict them to struggle this year, not relegation struggle, but maybe not push playoffs. But I think on paper and in-house they expected themselves to be a top half team like we do. And it was a big barometer for us. Now, on the day they were poor, but it's definitely the sort of game that I could see as drawing last season. You know, we would have drawn that game 0-0 last season, and we came away quite convincing winners in the end. And then Shrewsbury, again, I think we'd have drawn that 0-0 last season. It wasn't a pretty game. The conditions were horrible. We weren't on top form. But what that showed us was the depth of the squad that can come on. You know, change of shape, a change of personnel, ultimately change the game. On 60 minutes, we were by far the better team, and we did come out 1-0. You know, the deserved 1-0 win, I think, in that last half an hour showing. Shrewsbury didn't have a shot in that last half an hour. Like I said, it wasn't the prettiest game, but they're the 2 games that really stood out to me. Now, I remember on the last show, Gary mentioned Blackpool being a big barometer, and I kind of get that. Yeah. But I think what happened prior to Blackpool meant that we went into Blackpool really confident. So yeah, obviously it turned out a really convincing win again. But yeah, for me, Wickham really, really impressed me because of just how we were able to break them down, which is something we couldn't do last season. And then Shrewsbury really impressed me because of how much the squad really changed the game. Well, it did against Wickham really as well. But yeah, just the squad depth is just in a really good place. What about you, mate? Did you have one that really stood out?
It's kind of weird because I'm going to pick one of the games that we didn't win. And I'm not picking it for the fact that we played the best in that game, because I very much agree. Those 2 home victories especially. I mean, that last 30 minutes against Wickham, we were a class above. Blackpool, we took our chances well. We did exactly what we needed to do. And then the second half, specifically the last sort of 30 minutes, again, we were a class above. And that's something we've shown a lot. But I'm actually going to pick Northampton in the sense that last season we'd have lost that game. Almost definitely. They were fantastic at home. They're a really good side. I think they're going to be perfectly safe this season. And they did everything right. They combated us really well. Now, we made tactical errors in that game. We spoke about it on the podcast at the time. Obviously, me and you were both there, Chris. And going to the 4-4-2 in possession, it just didn't work.
The 25-minute experiment after half time. You know what? Credit to Mark Kennedy, by the way, because I wasn't on that week's pod. Because he made a mistake. I think that was obvious. It didn't work at all. A lot of managers in that moment would have thought, well, I've made this change at half time. I've got to stick through this now to the end of the game. I've got to stick to my guns and believe in it. 20 minutes in, it's like, this isn't working. And he changed it back. Fair play. And obviously, the last 5 minutes happened and we conceded 2 goals. That wasn't tactical, though. Northampton deserved it. Sorry, I interrupted you there. Carry on.
No, 100%. Exactly what you were saying. And we may have had certain managers or a manager in the past that if he were to ever actually switch formation mid-game, would have then stuck with it out of a stubbornness, an unwillingness to admit a mistake or whatever it may have been. And I'm not going into that per se. But what Mark Kennedy did was he realised, okay, look, this isn't working. He goes back to what we know, and we scored within 2 minutes of that tactical change. And that was because we were then suddenly back on the front foot again for those few minutes when Lasse Sorensen then whipped that ball in for Paul O'Connor. But yeah, ultimately that game, because they were so good, I genuinely do believe that we would have lost that game this time last season, or any time last season. If you look at Morecambe away, they came back at us after we'd gone. We went 2 up, didn't we? And then they got one immediately back, if I'm not mistaken. I was still in the bar at half time after their goal, so I can't actually remember it. But that, like I said, that's the sort of game that we would have lost. Sort of game that we stuck through. Yes, okay, we conceded a last-minute equaliser, but that game could have quite easily gone 2-1, and then we could be sitting here on more points than we are. So ultimately, that was the one game where I realised still that even though we weren't at our best, we still managed to get a draw and something special's coming. We've kind of skirted around and mentioned our points, but we do want to just have a little look, and we can smile at this, at the league table, or at least the top 9 of the league table, mainly because I couldn't find one with the 24.
Well, who cares about the bottom half anyway?
Exactly, because we're not in it. Hopefully next month I don't then have to show the bottom half only, and we can stay in here. But look, 4th after what, 5 league games, 10 points, all unbelievably happy. I think some of the games on paper we were hoping to win, and we did win. And like, you know, I put a tweet out before the Shrewsbury match saying, look, we're talking about this game as a winnable game, and last season that meant we were getting a draw at best. It's not the case, is it, at the minute?
No, just to kind of echo what we said at the top of the show, really, is just that it's been a really good start. We're in a really good place, but there are 41 league games remaining. I think we've always got to calm ourselves down a little bit. You can't take a snapshot of the league table now and just hope that's how it's going to be at the end. Obviously, we all hope it's going to be like this, but yeah, 41 games to go. A lot can happen there. But I suppose there's 2 ways of looking at it. It's only the start of the season. We can only get better. But at the same time, so can other clubs. And if anything, because we've done our business early, we've got a bit of a head start, but other clubs will settle as the season progresses. So I don't expect us to stay here all season, I'll be honest. But let's definitely enjoy this while we can. For me, it's more about just what's happening on the pitch, and if you get those kind of processes right on the pitch, which on the whole we are, particularly out of possession, then the points will look after themselves, won't they?
Absolutely. I think it's not just about the results, because first 5 games of the season, like you say, it can be very easy to get carried away. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I know much about Exeter's start of the season, Stevenage's start of the season, Port Vale start of the season, but specifically Exeter and Port Vale, I feel are teams that are picking up results at the minute. And like I said, I don't know about their performances, but their performances may not be at the same level that the 10-point mark is currently showing. For us, I feel like our performances are warranting the points that we've got. I don't think there has been a single game really that we should have lost that we won or anything like that.
Yeah, the only one that you might argue that's the case would be Northampton. I think last season, you're right, we would have lost that game. I think primarily because we wouldn't have scored 2 goals in the first place. But that's the one statistically that we did get massively outperformed. But I think a lot of that is also to do with game state as well, with a Lincoln City hat on. We were 1-0 up and then ultimately 2-0 up. And because of that, you don't need to go and attack. You don't need to try and score the 3rd and the 4th. You try and see out what you've got. Now, that means giving the opposition possession. And if they're good at it, it means conceding chances sometimes. And Northampton were very good at that. But if that was 0-0 at half-time, 0-0 after 60, 70 minutes, I don't think you see the statistics being as one-sided as they turned out to be, because Northampton were throwing the kitchen sink at it with 2-0 down. So, yeah, I think on paper, Northampton may be the one that we did nick something from. But, yeah, there's always that little bit of context there, isn't there?
That's the thing. I'm very much willing to agree with that. And you kind of ended it with the context, and later on, like you've mentioned, we are going to have a little look at the stats and the tactics that we've been sort of deploying so far this season. And a lot of the stats are pointless when you don't look at context. This points table, these 12, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 10, 9, 9, 9, pointless without context. It doesn't matter if you don't know how these teams are performing, because, like you say, we're not at the 30 game mark where actually January's been and gone. You're effectively seeing more or less where teams are going to finish, within the rough sort of give or take a few places. Not that many teams after 32 games, let's say, move more than 4 or 5 positions come the end of the season. But when after 5 games, obviously, like we said, we really have to kind of keep our feet on the ground and not get too excited. But it is very hard not to get too excited.
It just looks nice, doesn't it?
It does. And I'm more than happy for this to be the position that we're in all season.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we'd snap your hand up at that.
100%. So something else that's getting us very excited, and we've kind of touched on it before, is our squad depth. But what's going to be interesting, Chris, is how different are our best 11s from our first ones last month. Now, Chris, I spoke to you before recording this so that I could get this graphic together and so that we could discuss what our best 11 is. And you sent over yours, and funnily enough, it was the exact same as mine. And that's this one here. So just to run through it, we've got Jensen in goal, Jacko, O'Connor, and Rowan as the back 3, with Sorensen and Burrows as the wing backs. Erhan, Ethan Hamilton in midfield, Mandroyu, Rico Hackett in behind Ben House. Now, Chris, it's funny because we're talking about how strong the squad is as a whole and how realistically we've got 20 players that if any one of them was starting a game, we wouldn't feel dismayed at the fact that somebody else isn't starting. Against Sheffield United, we made 4 changes and we still managed to get the win. And actually, the talk about Paul O'Connor not being in the squad was only for a couple of minutes because Mitchell had such a great game, because Ioma had such a great game, and so on. So isn't it just a little bit intriguing that we've picked the exact same 11 here?
Very much so. Yeah, very much so. The fact that we've probably got genuinely, I think we've got the strongest squad I've ever known Lincoln City have in my lifetime.
Yeah,
and
I agree.
We've probably got the most options, and we've not mentioned how much of a difference those players coming off the bench has made. So obviously, a special mention to Ted Bishop, I think, primarily here. He's been outstanding. Every game that he's come off the bench, that last half an hour, he's had an impact. It's just interesting. Yeah, we've Ali Smith's come on in every game so far.
Yes. Yep.
And obviously got his start against Sheffield United and looked every inch a League One first team player. We've got so many options all over the pitch. Yet both you and I agreed on this. Our inverted commas, I think it's strongest starting 11.
Yes.
But it's not just a game of 11 now, is it? It's a game of a squad. You can make 5 subs per game, then they can all come on and make a difference. I think the big difference. So I've made 3 changes from my initial one last time, and you've made 2, haven't you? So that the 2 that we both made would be we both had Smith in the starting lineup with Hamilton. I think we'd only just signed Hamilton at the time, hadn't we? So we weren't.
I don't even think we had. Sure. I don't even think we had signed Hamilton.
Maybe that might explain it.
Yeah.
So that's a bit of a by default. We've kind of put Hamilton in there because he has played, so we've seen more of him. Burrows at left wing back ahead of Brown. He's just dislodged Brown really in the team, hasn't he, at the moment? But
again, not a slight on Brown.
No, I think he struggled a little in the first half against Northampton, and then he got brought up at half time. We haven't seen him make a start since until Sheffield United, of course. But Burrows is just that bit more robust, I think. I think Brown has definitely got some real value. He's obviously got that natural left foot. Burrows is 2-footed, but he's probably a bit quicker, that slightly more direct, I'd say, than Burrows who's a bit more defensively sound.
Yeah.
I think it's nice to have that option. But yeah, I think Burrows has just been that little bit more convincing for me. But they're very, very close, to be honest. I had Ioma in my starting lineup and my preferred 11. You didn't. You had the back 3 that we've got on screen at the moment, didn't you? I really like TJ, and I don't think he's let us down at all. I think he was brilliant once again against Sheffield United. But Jacko's, whenever he's played, he's just been outstanding. Just a man mountain at the back. Just nothing beats him, does it? I found it interesting because how you've got it lined up here with O'Connor centrally and Jacko on the right of the 3. I think that's what I would prefer out of those 3 centre halves. I think it's that order. Interestingly, when it has been that back 3, Jacko's generally been the central one, and Pordy's been playing on the right. I'm not saying that Pordy can't do it, but I don't know. I just think Pordy O'Connor, he's your captain, you play him in the middle. But who am I to argue with Mark Kennedy? It's certainly working. But I agree that they're the strongest 3 centre-backs currently. But how Alex Mitchell played last night, God, it's going to be difficult to do this in a month's time, isn't it?
Very much so. It's interesting you kind of pick up on the O'Connor. Obviously, I've put O'Connor in the middle here, and then Jacko on the right. And last month, I actually had Jacko in the middle with O'Connor on the right. And you and
me and Gary, we knocked you down.
You did, and now I'm sitting here very smugly,
And rightly so.
But the way I see it is O'Connor is better than Jackson with ball at feet, and that is it. And as far as I'm concerned, better with ball at feet means wider centre halves, and your no nonsense centre half. And O'Connor still is that. But your proper no-nonsense centre-half in Jackson needs to be in the middle from a pure tactical point of view. But I also very much agree and understand with the point of captain down the spine of the pitch. So
it wasn't just because he's captain. It's interesting that you say O'Connor is better on the ball than Jacko. I think they are very, very similar on the ball and off it. I think they're both just in terms of that profile, that type of player.
Yeah.
I think they're almost identical. So I suppose you could just put them either way.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think I would just prefer to put O'Connor essentially because I think he's going to long term. I think he's going to play there longer than Jacko will. I think Jacko at some point will be phased out, not necessarily this season, but at some point. And we've mentioned we've got Mitchell and Ayoma potentially coming in for that right-sided centre-half role. So for me, if O'Connor definitely plays, and then Jackson on form plays most often, then you keep O'Connor centrally. Jackson slots in and out on the right side, and then if Jackson isn't playing, whoever's playing instead of him can just slot in, and then it keeps rolling and O'Connor in that same position. But I suppose that's just credit to O'Connor's versatility. He just seems to be equally comfortable wherever he plays along that back three.
I guess when you're as good a defender as he is, it doesn't really matter to him, does it? He can adapt to any kind of role that he's being asked to play, which is a real bonus for us to have that in the team. And it's a real funny one with O'Connor because he is such a solid centre half. And I remember Gainsborough away, the first pre-season game of last season, and he was woeful. Kennedy was abusing him from the sideline. It was the first time we'd seen Kennedy and first time we'd seen O'Connor, and Kennedy was shouting at him constantly not being in the right position and all of this. For him to go from that and people walking out saying, "Oh, I'm really not sure about him being our new centre half, or maybe he's not good enough for the step up," to then being as a mainstay in the team as what we were talking about, the fact that yes, okay, he should probably have that central centre half role purely for the fact that he could quite easily get 46 games in that role this season. Provide well, in fact, I say that he's not playing on Saturday with his tonsillitis supposedly, so slight knock again. We've kind of mentioned Mitchell and Ayoma potentially fighting for that sort of right centre half spot, but then I guess anywhere else on the pitch, were there any tough decisions when you were making this best 11? Because we've spoken about how strong the squad is, even though we have a preferred starting 11. Were there any positions where you're kind of and ahhing?
I think left wing back is the one that's most up for grabs. I think it'll be a real interesting battle between Burrows and Brown because they're very, very different types of players.
Yeah,
and I think it'll be really interesting to see who, over the course of the season, makes that position their own. Now, let's not forget, Jaden Brown is a player that's contracted to us. Jordan Burrows is on loan, so maybe I would prefer to see our own player nail that position, but only through merit, not just because of the fact he's ours, so we play him. And he obviously offers that natural left side there, but Burrows can go both ways, which is really difficult to play against. Yeah, that's the one I think is most up for grabs because I've seen strengths and weaknesses in both of their games so far. I can't see a massive change in terms of the starting 11 anywhere else, but again, special mention once again to Teddy Bishop, who has been outstanding when he's come on. Like you say, Ayoma and Mitchell, it's going to be really difficult for Mark Kennedy to keep all five of those centre halves happy because they all deserve to play. And then we've, of course, got those options going forward as well. I think Tyler Walker will get better and better. I think we haven't seen the best of him yet. I think we've seen a different type of Tyler Walker than we expected to see. His hold-up play's been excellent. His hold-up play against Wickham particularly was outstanding. And when he came on against Blackpool, his flick-on was...
Could and should have got a goal against Wickham.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted nothing more than for him to score in that game. But then against Blackpool, he got it's kind of an assist of an assist, isn't it? His flick on set Ben House free, who then won the penalty.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's that style of it. That part of his game I've been impressed by. I'd just be really nice for him to kind of get off the mark with a goal. But I think we'll see more and more of him. But in terms of what we've seen so far, I don't think our starting 11 is going to look much more different to this, depending on Jacko's injuries and just load. So I know if we're playing Saturday, Tuesday, I imagine to see Jacko rotated a bit, and of course that left wing position potentially is a little bit up for grabs. It'd be a really interesting battle between the two of them. Apart from that, I think we're pretty settled in terms of that starting 11 at least.
Yeah, I would very much agree. I kind of wanted to sort of mention the House Walker, and look, a couple of people have commented on the fact that neither of them have scored yet, but that really does not matter because their work rate whenever each of them has been on the pitch has been absolutely outstanding, and it's a really positive thing for the future. I've got a real soft spot, and I mentioned it in last month's show, for Dylan Duffy. And I really thought that this season he was going to cement himself in the team. And it is purely through the ability that Rico Hackett has shown, in the fact that Dylan Duffy can't really get that much of a look in apart from sort of 10 minutes at the end of each game. And that is, like I said, that is purely down to the ability that Rico Hackett and also Danny Mandroyu, let's not forget, both of them have been absolutely outstanding in their roles this season, which is just unfortunate for somebody like Dylan Duffy.
Yeah, he's got time on his side though, and
he does.
Something that I'm sure Mark Kennedy has mentioned, and I always make a point of mentioning it, even at Sunday League level to all my lads, is that the team that starts the first game of the season is never, ever, ever the team that finishes the last game of the season. Like, there's so much change, of course, every season: injuries, suspensions, transfers, all that sort of stuff will happen. So Dylan Duffy will get his chance. That there will be an injury, there will be a suspension, there'll be something which means he gets somewhere in the team. So no fault of his own at the moment. Just got to be patient. If the lads that are on the pitch at the moment are doing it and performing at a really high level, which they, of course, are, then you have to accept that. It's a squad game. You know what I thought was really pleasing from Duffy? It was yesterday against Sheffield United. The celebrations after, just he's on the bench.
Jumping on the back.
He loves it. He's not been part of the team very much this season yet. He hasn't had the opportunity yet, but he's part of it. He's not moping about that he's not in the team. He's just part of the squad, and he's loving every moment of it. That just shows some really good attitude. You often get those lads that maybe haven't been involved quite so much in the actual game, been on the bench, maybe think, oh yeah, we did well, but I wasn't involved, so I don't feel part of it. He clearly feels part of it. He knows he's got a role to play. And I think that's credit to him for having a positive attitude, but also credit to the environment that Mark Kennedy has put together as well to create that togetherness. I think that's often it's an intangible, but it's you can see it, you can feel it, and that's definitely there now. More so than it was this time last year because we were still building it, and more so than it ever was at any point under Michael Appleton, I have to say.
100%. And you've just stolen the point out of my mouth there, because I was just going to say the team spirit that Kennedy seems to have created, and it was so evident that that one video that Lincoln put on Twitter, and I mentioned it in the pod last night, the one that was just called Scenes, and it was the fans celebrating. It was good, sure, but the players celebrated. It meant so much to every single one of those players, and like I say, even the ones that didn't come onto the pitch, and that. The fact we've spoken about it being such a strong squad, and yet the starting 11 is almost cemented at the minute, without any major changes, and the fact that they're all still so happy is again a testament, like you say, to Kennedy and the environment he's created. So now that we've had a little look at the best 11, and as you can see on screen, we've lined it up in a certain formation. So Chris, why don't we go ahead and start looking at the tactical setup we've been deploying so far? So, as I said, we're going to now take a look through the tactics. And Chris, this is your absolute favourite part of the monthly show, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
As you can all see, we've got the tactical board on screen. So, Chris, why don't you just talk us through this shape that we've been starting every game in?
Well, as we predicted, no, we didn't. I don't think it took a rocket scientist to predict it, to be honest. But as we predicted in our last show, I think Plan A has definitely been the 3-4-3 that we kind of favoured last season, certainly for the majority of last season towards the end, and that's how it's transpired this season. So of course we've got our back three, our 2 6s sitting in front of them, two wing backs, but very forward-thinking wing backs, probably a lot more so than last season, I would say. And then, of course, we've got Mandzukic and Hackett in those kind of hybrid roles, kind of that hybrid between a winger and that kind of number 10 in behind the striker, who has been Ben House more often than not this season. That's primarily been our in-possession shape, which, of course, allows us to attack with a front five, with the two wing backs pushing on and Hackett and Mandzukic. They're up in behind Ben House. One thing that we both kind of wanted to mention at this point, and it was in reference to the Northampton game, wasn't it? Is just the difference in possession and out of possession shape, because formations are all kind of idealistic, really, but they all kind of shift and change depending on opposition. And what Mark Kennedy made a point of, and we referenced it earlier in terms of that 4-4-2 experiment, that the change he made at half time, but that was actually only an in possession change. So out of possession in the first half against Northampton, we were actually defending in a 4-4-2 as well. So I think, well, how did that work? Well, I will show you. So ignore the numbers here. Imagine who's kind of in these starting positions. So number 6 here would be Sean Rowan. Number 3 would be Jack Burrows. Number 2 would be Lars Sorensen, I think. No, it wouldn't. I'm telling you.
No, wasn't it Jaden Brown and Jack Burrows?
Jaden Brown, sorry, was left wing back.
Yeah.
Jack Burrows was right wing back. And then we had the 3 centre halves here. So what happened is he tucked in. Hackett played next to House. Brown tucked in at left back. TJ shuffled across to right back. And we defended in a back four with Danny Mandzukic pushing left. That's only out of possession. And then in possession, we just shifted back into that same shape. So Mandzukic tucked inside. Brown pushed on. And then the back three shuffled across like so. And that was what we happened quite a lot in the first half. So when Mark Kennedy referenced the point, and we all kind of know that, we changed to 4-4-2, it didn't work. We only actually changed to 4-4-2 in possession. So we didn't have to do that switch in and out of possession. And loads of teams do that. So when we say that this team plays in this shape or in this shape or in this shape, what we're normally referring to is that's the shape that they prefer in possession. Out of possession sometimes can be different. And I think a prime example of this is Man City. I don't follow elite football too much, certainly not this season, but last season and the season before, when they played in their, what everyone thought Man City always play in 4-3-3. They don't anymore, but they always played in a 4-3-3. But they actually defended out of possession in a 4-4-2. Kevin De Bruyne went and played up next to the striker, and everyone else shifted around into a 4-4-2. So yeah, that was just worth kind of pointing out, really, in terms of in possession and out of possession. But I think primarily in most games, we've been in and out possession in a shape that looks similar to this. Of course, out of possession, we've been slightly deeper, maybe like this, into a more of a defensive 5. But ultimately, the roles stay quite similar. The only real change that we've seen is Kennedy has favoured a switch to a 3-5-2, and it's been a 3-5-2 with Irahan sitting deeper and then 2 central rather than the 10. Because we predicted this, or we discussed this on the last show, didn't we? In that, we've definitely got the squad makeup now to go to 3-5-2. The question will be, will we go 3-5-2 in the shape that's on the screen, or will we go a 3-5-2 with a number 10? And how it's transpired is it seems to be we've been a 3-5-2 at times in this shape, with the more robust, if you like, and solid shape, with Ted most often being in this position here, in that number 7 on the screen, with the license to break forward. But it's definitely been that 3-5-2. That's the shape that we've kind of favoured at times when Mark Kennedy's wanted to change it on the hour mark. And it's really, really nice to have that tactical flexibility, isn't it?
100%. And it has clearly helped. We spoke about Wickham, and we mentioned the fact that realistically, the first half of that Wickham home game was pretty dire. There wasn't really any chances for either side. And then come the 60-minute mark, when we moved to this formation, it broke the game open for us. And if we'd have started in this system, that may not have happened, because we run the risk of people saying, well, why don't we just start like that? If that's better, why don't we start like that? Because that isn't always better. There are some games where it won't work as well. There are some games where actually they're going to set up to defend against a 3-5-2. And obviously, we've spoken about player for player, different formations. We want a 1-on-1 or a 2-on-1 situation in the attacking attacking system, which this formation can sometimes give us. Sometimes the 3-4-3 is better. So there isn't always one size fits all. Now, I just wanted to pick up on Northampton, and we're not a Northampton podcast here, so I'm going to keep it nice and brief. But one thing, it was a really tactical game, wasn't it, Chris? At the end of
Very much so, yeah. Well, you and I think the majority of our discussion was trying to work out what on earth Northampton were doing with their system, and it was great. There was so many rotations, weren't there? Because they were definitely in a back four, but it was a situational back three in build up, wasn't it? And it was really interesting. That's what the sort of elite teams do regularly: is shift shape quite a lot in and out of possession, not just in and out of possession, but in different phases of build up.
So this was sort of the 4-3-3, if you like, that they wanted. That you know, if you go on BBC Sport or anything like that and looked at formations and lineups, this is how their team would have looked. Obviously, with midfield slightly more forward than where they are. But what actually happened was in game, it was the right centre mid that kind of dropped back then to make a sort of wide centre half role, and these wing backs were actually playing more as wide midfielders. So what effectively happened was in possession. Yes, it was in possession, wasn't it? So in possession, they actually went to more of a 3-4-3, similar to how we lined up.
Yep. So they matched us up.
They did, which was then really interesting in the fact that we obviously were going 4-4-2 out of possession to try and combat this. Which again, it's just really intriguing that it's actually a real positive to know that Mark Kennedy is, you know, he says 80% of the work we do in the lead up to a game is about us, sure. But actually knowing what the other team may do helps us protect against that and that kind of 4-4-2 out of possession in the first half.
Just add just quickly as to kind of why it makes sense for Kennedy to want to defend in a 4-4-2 against this shape? Because in an ideal world, you always want to defend with an extra defender against their attackers. So you have kind of a +1 in a defensive phase. So they've got a front three.
Yeah.
We defend in a back four then. Because if we defend in a back five, then you've got one player that you don't need that's kind of not marking anybody. Or if you think, oh, it's more of a 3-5, it's a 3-4-3, so we're actually defending in a 3. Well, then you're man for man. So a back four out of possession makes sense against the front three. You then, of course, man for man in midfield, and then you've obviously got a -1 against them. Now, of course, that's works perfect sense away from home, makes perfect sense in terms of counter-attacking. It does limit your chances to create overloads in the counter-attacking phase, because you're then asking one of a back four to go out of position quite considerably to get forward and join the attack. But yeah, that's kind of it made sense to me once understanding how Northampton were playing while we were defended in a 4-4-2 out of possession. In possession, maybe not so much,
But then it kind of, you mentioned the counter-attack and the fact that we are then a -1 in attack, but actually then it's about the speed in which that we can get back to our in-possession shape as soon as we then regain the ball, which is why there is a difference between an out-of-possession shape and an in-possession shape. And it's something that Mark Kennedy's banged on about loads already this season. We're just going to pick up on a few different stats now when we're kind of looking through it. So as you can see on the screen, obviously, we're playing in this 3-4-3 primarily, starting in that the 5-2-3, whatever it is that you'd like to call it. But it's interesting that we have to work so hard on out of possession work, and the fact we have worked so hard on out of possession work, because actually we have not had a game so far this season where we've had more possession than the other team. We've averaged 39.6% in the league so far, which is a lot lower than if you could take into consideration cup matches. I think it was 27% possession against both Notts County and Sheffield United off the top of my head. So again, they're two games with considerably lower possession. But we've not been dominated really in any match so far. And that is a testament to the out of possession. A few stats that I kind of picked up, because even when we've got such low possession, actually, we've got the second lowest amount of shots in the league, Chris. So we've had 44 shots. I think the lowest is Shrewsbury with 39. But we're actually, we're about mid-table for shots on target, so, which is 19. Our shot on target percentage, which is 43%, that's second in the whole league. And we've got the highest number of goals per shots and the third highest goals per shots on target. Now, to me, that states, and I know that you'll go into XG as you like to do, Chris, but to me that states that, okay, we may not necessarily be creating as many chances as an unbelievably attacking side, but what we are doing is we're unbelievably clinical. With every chance we get, a lot of them get a shot off, and a lot of them get well, not just a hit and hope. This is the thing. It's about having really solid shots, really solid chances, and that's what we seem to be doing really well.
Yeah, I think it's about the quality of chances that we're creating now. Might be a good idea to kind of bring in a little bit of comparison to last season, because how we compare to last season at this stage, so 5 games in compared to 5 games in last season, it's quite a stark contrast actually. But just quickly, one big change is our average possession after 5 games last season was 46.5. You mentioned it's now 39.7. Now, one really interesting stat, this is one that I like a lot, which is it's PPDA, so it's passes allowed per defensive action. So what that means is how many passes do the opposition have before you win the ball back, an interception, a tackle, a foul, something along those lines. So the lower number, the higher pressing team that is. That means that you're generally trying to engage higher up the pitch, trying to win the ball back higher, more aggressively. So last season, our possession was 46.5. Our PPDA was 10.9. So we allowed 10.9 passes before we kind of won the ball back. That's quite a low number. That's a high pressing side. That's now 16.7. So we've increased that by a couple of thirds. We allow more passes. We have less possession of the ball. What that suggests, though, is that, and there was no metric for this, and I would love to see it, but the kind of the context and the eye test that we've got and the games that we've watched would suggest to me that we are allowing teams to have possession of the ball in their defensive third. And I think we can see that. But what we're doing out of possession, this is what you were going to talk about, touching on the point you made on the screen in terms of how much effort you put into that out of possession organization, because we don't just try and press and try and win the ball, but carry out the pitch to work hard to try and do it individually. We do it incredibly kind of coordinated, and that takes so much training because. And this is for people that maybe you think, why is he not pressing the goalkeeper? Go and close him down. Why is that guy lazy? And all football fans see it because you don't know what's happened on the training pitch. If anyone that's maybe ever thought that, why is he not just chasing the ball? It may well be because the trigger is to press on a certain area. And, if anyone that's kind of, let's go down to Sunday League football, you get lads that work the backside off. You get lads that are lazy, don't you? You get lads that have had a few pints the night before. And everyone's kind of playing their own game. But you'll have lads that... They're working so hard. They're doing the running for their teammates. They're just doing it on their own. And if you run, let's imagine, right, that the opposition centre back has the ball, and he's got a left back, another centre back, and a right back next to you. We're in this shape. Let's imagine that we've got Rico Hackett here. We've got Danny Mandroyu here. Their centre back's got the ball, and Ben House decides, I'm going to work really, really hard because I'm a hard-working player and I want to impress everybody. I'm going to go and run and try and close him down. Well, if they've got options left, right, and centre of him, easy pass around him, and now they're into this third, and Ben House is out the game. You have to be coordinated. And, of course, football is a fluid game. So one of the underappreciated skills that players have, and Mark Kennedy's made a point of how good Ben House is at this, but also that managers have and teams have, is that understanding that tactical shape and those triggers of when do we go, when the ball goes in what position to what player, when do I go, what angle do I run at, do I curve my run to block off a pass elsewhere, what part of the pitch are we trying to make them play in, what part of the pitch are we trying to block off. And I think the statistics show that we're just allowing them to opposition teams to have the ball in that defensive third, but we're just so much more organised at winning it back in dangerous areas. And don't mean dangerous areas in terms of the final third, but I mean once they've taken a risk and played a ball into an area that we've set up to try and trap them, and subsequently from that, we are then creating better chances and higher quality chances, which shows, we've doubled the amount of shots on target that we're having compared to this time last season. Our crossing accuracy is more than double what it was this time last season. Despite the fact that our possession is less and our passes per defensive action is more. And I think that just shows we've got more of a clearly defined style than we had last season. So it's interesting. If you look at that, you think, like you said, you made a point. I'm going to throw your mate under the bus here who said, all the stats just show that Lincoln are playing anti-football then. And it's just incredibly well drilled out of possession football. And when you play how we do in that regard, every single part of that jigsaw, every cog has to know its role, has to work perfectly, has to adapt. And certainly when you're playing against a front three against a back four, well then, you know, you're going to be a -1. You have to know which of their players you leave unmarked, and that will change depending on situation. I've been so impressed with our out of possession setup, but you know, it's so difficult to kind of just verbalize it, you know, to explain it. But hopefully what we've done a little bit there is just explain a little bit as to kind of how the numbers indicate how we're playing, and then with the context of us seeing the only real kind of comfortable possession that we're allowing oppositions to have is in their defensive third. It kind of adds up, doesn't it, with the statistics that we're seeing?
Absolutely. And I very much agree. The out of possession work that's clearly been put in on the training ground. Every player on that pitch for Lincoln City knows exactly what their role is, and they're all executing their role to the highest of ability. And genuinely, that is why I have got so much faith in Mark Kennedy at the minute. And I had it last season, but this season is, like you say, it's really hard because actually it's some of the intangibles. The out of possession, there isn't that many out of possession stats that you can look to. So actually, a lot of it is just the eye test. It's the context behind it, and that's something that, you know, we're trying to kind of talk through now and sort of relay to all of you guys. And it would have been the stuff that you guys would have also seen, but it's just putting it all into context and all one kind of big sort of bundle, if you like, of stats. Now, I do just want to kind of ask you a question though, Chris. And we've sort of touched on it, you know, we've sort of touched on the context. But look, like I said, we're second lowest for shots in the league. We've only had 44 shots. Yes, okay, we've scored quite a lot of goals per shot. But actually, Chris, if we were looking at another team in our league that had the same stats, would we be sitting here and saying, well, actually, this isn't sustainable. This purple patch that they're in is gonna end, and when it does, it's gonna go bad for them?
It's a really good question. I think the context is really important because you know we like to go deep dive into the stats, and of course, hopefully, the people that tune into this are kind of similar minded. But I think it's really worth pointing out is stats don't tell the whole story. As much as you and I both are appreciative of them and, you know, like them and read a lot into them, they don't tell the whole story. Having that extra bit of context does. And let's be honest, if we were looking at solely the numbers from an opposition team, then there are some of those numbers that you're going to go, well, you know what, this is a bit unsustainable. Maybe it is because points, goals, well, certainly the big one's XG, isn't it? You know, the amount of goals that we have scored compared to the amount of goals that our XG has generated, we've scored more goals than our XG suggests, and that's the big one, really, isn't it? And you know, our goals against is pretty much on par with what the XG suggests. It's our clinical nature of our chances, and you think, oh well, they're just outperforming their XG over the course of the season. That'll even itself out. They'll drop down the table. So, to answer your question, if I was solely looking at the numbers, looking at the stats, there are some of those stats which you look into and you think, yeah, maybe it is unsustainable. But then with the context of we know how we're generating the chances that we are, despite them being low in number, we know that they're high in quality and we know why they're high in quality. When you kind of add all the different stats together, so the fact that possession is low, but passes allowed per defensive action is high or higher than it was last season, you know, all these little bits and bobs, if you were to look at the whole picture, you kind of go, okay, it kind of makes sense. And you can look at this, you can see in just the numbers, without the context, just the numbers, why the numbers are there. So I think it'd be really interesting to see how they continue, because we've only played 5 games. That's really a really small sample size. I think that's the big one. After 10, 15 games, if these trends continue, then you kind of think, well, there's something in that. You know, there's a reason that they're outperforming those numbers. That's because they're really kind of above average in certain metrics. Or maybe in 10 games time, they have evened themselves out, or they've dropped off a little bit, and we find ourselves in mid-table. I don't know what the answer is to your question. I don't know. I think with my Lincoln City hat on, I'm going to go, no, we're just brilliant. And yeah, of course, we wouldn't say that about another team. Of course, it's not outperforming. If this was them, we'd be really objective and say they're just really good because. But I think, let's be honest, if we was previewing a team for a podcast and it had the stats that we've got, we would pick holes in it. We'd say, okay, they've had a good start to the season on the points tally, but let's look at these particular statistics: second lowest number of shots, low possession. you wouldn't expect, if we can defend well, we're gonna think we've got something, we can take something here. So yeah, maybe we would.
It's a sort of thing personally. To kind of, if I was to answer my own question, I'd be saying no, it isn't unsustainable. Because the performances, yes, okay, some of the numbers you may look at and think, oh, that's gonna tail off, sure. But as we've spoken about in context, the performances that we've had, we're going from strength to strength. There's such a togetherness in the team that actually I'm expecting games where we're gonna concede more than 1 XG, maybe more than 1.5, maybe even 2 XG, and yet we keep a clean sheet. And that's not sort of picking out the fact that Lucas Jensen's going to make so many saves, but that's picking out the fact that actually our defence, they're willing to put bodies on the line. And in all fairness, it's rare that we're ever going to concede as much XG as that. You mentioned sort of the goals against, and the XG against was actually sort of quite similar. Now, I'm assuming that that's going to be quite skewed because, if I'm not mistaken, Bolton was something like 0.77 XG against. I'm almost certain they massively overachieved it because obviously they only really had the couple of chances from the corner and then obviously the own goal. So we are obviously conceding XG. You are going to do every game. You're never going to have a game where you're conceding 0.0 XG. It's just not going to happen. But what it is doing is, if we can keep that low, we're keeping the quality of chances against us low, and that's what's sort of becoming good. And we are sort of having really good chances ourselves. A couple of our goals that we've scored are going to have really low XG. Ethan Errahan's goal against Blackpool, that's going to be very, very minimal in terms of XG, but that's then a goal. So, like you say, really small sample size at the minute. I think overall, at the end of the season, you'll typically find that a team will have very similar XG for and goals for and XG against and goals against. And at the minute, I don't see us tailing off like that. I don't see it as being unsustainable because the performances that are on the pitch, the togetherness in the team, quite frankly, all the intangibles, as we've spoken about, the out of possession setup, everything is looking good at the minute. The fact that we're going into deadline day and not desperate for a player, it's just putting us in a really, really solid position.
Yeah, I suppose just to finish up with a couple of points, really. The first one being to answer your question, will we see a drop off in the performances that have led to the numbers? I think no. I think that is sustainable. I agree with you. I think it is sustainable because we know how they've appeared. I think if I was looking at this purely objectively at an opposition team, I might come to a conclusion that maybe it's unsustainable because I haven't got the context. Also, just quickly on XG, because of course we talk about it quite a lot. I think what's worth pointing out is that XG doesn't necessarily represent massively accurately how many goals should be scored in a game in terms of how it's generated. It's a good guess, but it's not massively accurate. For example, Bolton scored with a 0.0 XG because Pordio's scored an own goal, and that therefore means it would be a 0.0 XG. But if Pordio kind of missed it and it got tapped in by their mate because it was on the 6-yard box in the middle of the goal, that's probably like a 0.7 XG, and that shoots the numbers up. So yeah, just for people that were maybe unsure how XG is calculated, firstly, there are loads of different metrics. So what I see on Y-Scout, for example, is the metric I use might be slightly different. So I use Flash Score, for example, just to keep on top of the results that when they're coming in, and that'll have a slightly different version, a slightly different way of measuring it. So they are slightly different, but effectively each shot on target is measured in a percentage. So if there's 100% chance of it going in, then that will be an XG of 1. If there's for example, a penalty is always a 0.75, I think, or 0.8 XG.
7.9, isn't it?
Oh, there you go, 7.9.
Yeah.
Then depending on what part of the pitch the shot's taken from, and then some metrics will take into position, whether it's a header, whether it's off the ground, whether it's left foot, right foot, what the positioning of defenders are. So you tend to find places like Y-Scout that have a more in-depth data pool are able to see those things, and maybe it's a little more accurate. But basically, each shot that's an attempt on goal is given a mark or a percentage chance of going in on average, with all those metrics taken in position. So a lot of what we've conceded this season has been a cumulative XG. Take Northampton out of it, where they had some really big chances. Most chances that we've conceded have been accumulative. So So I think what comes to mind is that Shrewsbury were hovering around 1. The one shot, the only clear-cut chance I can remember them having was that chance in the first half on the counter-attack, which was reasonably wide. They've had an XG of about 0.3, 0.4, I'd have thought. And from there, they had another nine chances. And from that, they had an accumulative XG of about 0.6, 0.7, which means less than 0.1. So less than a 10% chance of that goal going in, or that shot going in, on average, in each of their individual attacks from that point. So just because there was an XG of 1 doesn't necessarily mean that they actually did deserve to score a goal, because they had a massive chance that they should have knocked away and they missed a sitter. Similarly, if we're creating really high quality chances, we might only have 4, 5, 6 shots on over the game. But if we're creating 2 or 3 that are really clear cut, then we might have an XG of 1.5. But we did deserve to kind of get that. So so those people that maybe were tuning into this and thinking, they always talk about XG. What does it actually mean? How does it actually calculate? That hopefully just gives a little bit of an insight into how it's calculated and why it's useful, but why it's not necessarily factual. But you're absolutely right. Over the course of a season, most teams will generally score or concede near enough the amount of goals which is replicated in their XG numbers. If you are overperforming your XG in terms of scoring more than you should do, it means you're really, over the course of a season, it means you're a high performing team creating high quality chances, and you can converting average. And if you're underperforming, like Forest Green did last season massively on both metrics, then you're just a weaker team. You just you're defensively, a team at the level wouldn't be conceding as many as you are, but which means individually and tactically and technically the players are just not at the highest, not at that quality. That's how you can maybe, in terms of recruitment, you can use those sort of metrics as good ways of gauging players at what level they should be playing at.
100%. And at the end of the day, XG is the exact same as any other stat. They are all unbelievably useful as long as you don't use them on their own. Because any stat that is used on its own and without others, or without the context of the eye test, as we call it, without anything like that, every single stat is useless. So I think that's kind of, 100%. So that's kind of a good place to wrap up the sort of tactical review side of the monthly show. So now, why don't we just take a little look to finish off at the month ahead? Okay, so let's have a little look at the month ahead then. Now we have, 6 games. There are 2 cup games in there. Derby away, for those who don't know, is a Papa John's Trophy game. I know some people are for the Papa John's Trophy, some people are against it, but we're going to put it in anyway. But realistically, that game will be a good chance of rotation. It's a good chance to have some of the players who don't necessarily get to start play. And the fact that we've spoken about, we've got actually such a, not necessarily a massive squad. We're not a team with 25 players, but we're a team that every player that's in the squad could quite easily start the game. So again, that's a really positive sort of option there. Portsmouth away also stands out to me on the 23rd of September, that is. And then just look at that. We've got West Ham. What a lovely kind of fixture schedule when you just see West Ham reigning European champions. It is.
Yeah, that's the highlight of the month. It's incredible. But Bristol Rovers away, firstly. Interesting game that will be, in my opinion. Really interesting game. I still don't know what I make of Bristol Rovers yet. Still not sure. I predicted them to really struggle this year. And then on early season form, I was so wrong. But then just maybe as the tide just started to turn a little bit, I don't know. I do think it's a game we can get something out of. I can't see us playing much differently against them than we have in most of their away games, probably allowing them to have a lot of the ball and try and hit them on the break. And a point, yes, I'll take a point. We can get 3, but I'd definitely take a point.
Well, it's funny you say that, because I don't see us going there and losing, if I'm honest. And I don't know if that's just some misguided confidence from the past month results. But for those of you that have listened to the podcast or seen the preview that Ben did with Charlie from Warm Rovers Vlogs, not me, you will have kind of heard what I'm about to say. But Bristol Rovers specifically struggle against teams that let them have the ball and are willing to sit in a low block. So actually, we have got a really good chance against Bristol Rovers. Carlisle then at home on the 16th. 2 2 weeks. You know, we've got a free weekend now and 2 free midweeks, because the Oxford game, for those of you who haven't seen it, has been called off for international call-ups, which actually then gives Kennedy, well, he'll inevitably give the players a few days off, but it'll give him 7 to 10 days on the training pitch, which I'm not saying that we need it, considering the amount of great sort of comments we've been making about the tactical setup, but it just helps to rehome that. And also, if we do end up bringing a player in today, it allows them to be really integrated into the squad over that 2 weeks, which is, again, a real positive. Obviously, we mentioned Derby, Portsmouth. We've mentioned West Ham. That will be the Wednesday night. I'm almost certain of it. There is a very tiny chance that it'll be the Thursday, but I don't expect that at all. So, like I say, more than likely the Wednesday, with then Portsmouth and Cheltenham sort of anchoring either side of that West Ham. So really, if we're just taking the league fixtures, Chris, so Bristol Rovers, Carlisle, Portsmouth and Cheltenham, 4 league games, how many points would you be happy with? What's the minimum you'd be happy with? And then what do you expect? And then what do you hope, if you like, from those 4 fixtures?
Minimum I'd be happy with. If we had this up before the season started, but we had this little block of games, I think I'd probably say 5 points. Carlisle and Cheltenham, I think we can beat them, but on last season's performances, you think, we're definitely going to draw against one of those. So yeah, I'd probably say 4 or 5 points. I think now, genuinely, I think 7. I really think 7 is a minimum that we can aim to get here. Well, I think it's obvious now. We're going to beat Carlisle and Cheltenham 3-0 both, because we win every home game 3-0 now. It seems.
Well, that's it. It's better than drawing 1-1 at every home game.
Yes, of course. But I think the point stands is they're definitely winnable games, and I think we're good enough to beat them. Particularly Cheltenham. I think Cheltenham are probably on early showing one of not many teams, to be honest, that we predicted to struggle that look like they're going to. They do look a little bit cut away already, a little bit. Now, that's not to say they're not going to do work wonders on deadline day and going to improve as the season progresses, but just in terms of the evidence that we have so far, I would be really disappointed if we didn't get all 3 points against Cheltenham. And actually, on current form, I'd be disappointed if we didn't get 3 points against Carlisle. So I'm predicting that we do win both of our home games. A point against Bristol Rovers, though we can win it, but I'm thinking realistically. And then again, there's no reason why we can't get a point away at Portsmouth, but I'm predicting us to lose against them. So best case scenario would be 10 points from 4 games. I think that's really unrealistic, though. But I think even predicting 7 points feels like a lot. But I think that's what I'm going for. I'm going to predict we get 7 points here. Well,
I'm actually saying I'm very much agreeing with the minimum that we would be pleased with would be 7. I am predicting that we're getting either 8 or 9. So that is either an unbeaten run or 3 wins and a loss. Because to me, I very much agree. I think Carlisle and Cheltenham are both really winnable games. And that's no slight on them as teams and how they're playing at the minute. But that's more the kind of benefit of the fact that we're playing really well. Their home games, our home form is good at the minute, so far. And yes, I know we've only had 2, but we're a couple of really good home games. And Bristol Rovers away, I'm very much hoping. Portsmouth, for me, is the biggest unknown. It's the one that I am most worried about out of the 4, which I think is right. Portsmouth, big club, going away to Fratton Park. It's always a tough place to go. And yeah, I would love Rico Hackett to go ahead and get a hat-trick just to silence some of their fans down there.
Would love nothing more than him to. He's been such a shining light this season. I'm so pleased for him, particularly because he gets to put a couple of fingers up at Portsmouth fans, doesn't he? They give him a really hard time. You know what? The Portsmouth game's the only one really that stands out to me in regards to how I feel about that will be dictated by how the previous games go. So depending on how we do against Bristol Rovers and Carlisle will probably dictate as to how confidently we go in, I feel, about going into Portsmouth. I think the rest of them, in isolation, I feel like we've got enough to get something from them. So, Bristol Rovers said, even if we have a bad month leading up to the Cheltenham game, I still expect us to win that game. But the Portsmouth one, depending on whether I expect us to lose or win or draw, might be depending
The
on
thing
how we
is,
do in the previous 2 or 3 games.
If we beat Bristol Rovers and Carlisle, that'll be 4 league wins in a row. So if we're taking 4 league wins in a row down to Fratton Park, suddenly it becomes expectation rather than hope. For
But also not many teams win 4 games in a row, and hardly any teams win 5 in a row. Just statistically speaking, that just doesn't happen. So yeah, that'd be interesting. But in terms of how confident would we go into that game on the back of 2 wins, well, yeah, there would be some expectation there. You're absolutely right.
Exactly. And we won't even talk about how hopeful / expectant would be against Cheltenham if we managed to pull something off against West Ham. So that's
oh god, yeah. I mean, typical Lincoln, wouldn't it? Beat West Ham, lose to Cheltenham at home.
Of course. It happened last season with Chippenham and Bristol City. Not that we need to mention them anymore because cup games, we're already on another cup run now. So the whole Chippenham...
We're suddenly a cup team now.
We are,
again, aren't we?
We are. It is brilliant. I just very much hope that, because our next monthly show will be previewing games in October. Now, October obviously doesn't have an FA Cup fixture. That doesn't start until the first weekend of November. So
I love first FA Cup first rounds. Oh, it's my favourite weekend of the year.
What so that you can pee off to Germany?
I did do that last year. I will do that again at some point this November, hopefully as well. But no, I just not from with a Lincoln City hat on. I love non-league football, and I love it when you get that story of a non-league club that gets a draw against a league club. I know everyone loves the third round when you get like a lower league club playing against a Premier League club, but it's just the same for a non-league club playing against a league club. And I love it for that. But yes, we're not going to be previewing that in the next one because that's previewing October's fixture.
But we will hopefully be previewing a cup fixture. Notts County or Wolves at home in the Pavilions. But it'd be nice if we also had a League Cup one, but we're not going to get ahead of ourselves. So look, that is the monthly show. We're just going to have our faces back for the outro. That is the monthly show kind of wrapped up. Chris, thank you so much for coming on and being the tactical genius that I alluded to at the start.
I'm not a genius. Please don't call me a genius. You're just getting people. All you're doing is asking people to comment in fact, that's good though. We want people to comment in YouTube.
Exactly.
Say, no, Chris isn't a genius. He doesn't know what he's on about. Just call me the tactics guy, or if you like, not the genius.
No, we're going to call you the tactics genius because, guys, please do put comments in down below. Look, make sure to go and check out all the other content. We've spoken so much recently about how much content has been coming out at the start of the season. And look, we've had podcasts twice a week with no sign of slowing down. We've got previews coming left, right, and centre. There may even be another video out today if we end up making a signing on, an insight into that, as we've been doing so far throughout the whole transfer window. Be sure to, like I said, check everything out, like, subscribe, comment, do all of that kind of fun stuff. But Chris, thank you so much for joining me, and up the Imps.
Up the Imps.